Hey everybody, great to be learning with you today as we continue our studies of Masechet Brachot and begin to explore the 7th Mishnah in the 6th chapter, which focuses on which bracha to make when you have a food mixture. Over the course of today's lesson, we'll have a chance to look at two things. The first is to define the terms Ikar and Tofel, and knowing those terms will help us achieve a second goal, which is to determine which bracha or blessing to recite when you have a mixture of foods eaten together at once. When you have different foods eaten together at once, like cereal and milk, two distinct foods with two distinct brachot, mezonot and shahakol, or for example, meat and potatoes, again, the potatoes, shahakol, and the meat, ha'adama, or even an ice cream cone, shahakol, and mezonot. When you have all of these various foods eaten together at once, the Mishnah wants to focus on which bracha you would actually recite on this food mixture, because you have at least two brachot in operation, and the question is, which of those brachot is going to be the bracha that you make on this food mixture? So in order to understand which bracha to make, we have to first define some terms, and the first is Ikar. Ikar, which means primary or main, refers to the main food in the mixture. It's generally going to be the food that gives the most nourishment or the most enjoyment. Another word we need to know is Tofel, which means secondary, or in the case of Ikar and Tofel, the food that is not the main food, but rather one that is eaten as an enhancement to add flavor or taste. Now, generally speaking, the Mishnah tells us that when you have a situation of Ikar and Tofel, there's a very specific rule. Zeha klal. Here's what you do. Kol shehu Ikar, when you have a food mixture, and there's a primary item in that mixture, v'imo tfela, and with that primary item, it is eaten along with a secondary item. The Mishnah rules, mevarich al ha'ikar, you make a bracha on the primary item, upoter et ha'tfela, and it covers the secondary item. In other words, when you have an Ikar and you have a Tofel, the general rule is make a bracha on the Ikar, not on the Tofel, because the bracha on the Ikar covers the bracha on the Tofel. Now, this rule applies in specific situations. Let's take a look at a few rules that will help us understand when it really does apply. The first rule has to do with the food combination itself. Of course, Ikar and Tofel can only apply when you actually have a food combination, like cereal and milk. It wouldn't apply when you have foods that are eaten separately of one another. Secondly, both items have to be eaten together. Going back to our example of the cereal and the milk, let's say you finish the cereal, which would be the Ikar, any remaining Tofel, in this case, the milk, would require its own blessing since it is no longer eaten with the Ikar in the same spoonful or in the same mouthful. So Ikar covers Tofel so long as you're dealing with an actual food combination, and as long as the Ikar and the Tofel are eaten together. There's a third rule, and that is that the Ikar covers the Tofel. In other words, you don't need a bracha on the Tofel unless the Tofel item is mezonot. Let's go back to our cereal and milk example for a moment. Let's say a person was on a high calcium diet and needed to drink a lot of milk, but didn't want to drink the milk by itself, and so he or she added some cereal just to make it taste a little bit better. In this case, the cereal is the Tofel item, not the Ikar item. And in this situation, if the mezonot item, which is Tofel, would require its own bracha, because mezonot is such an important bracha that even when it is treated as Tofel, it still gets its own bracha. So in this scenario where you really want the milk, where the milk is Ikar and the cereal is Tofel, you'd make two brachot. The bracha on the Ikar, which is what you're always going to do, but in this case, you'd also make a second bracha on the Tofel, only because, in this case, the Tofel item is mezonot. So let's put it all together. Ikar covers the Tofel only when you have an actual food combination. Both foods are eaten together in the same spoonful, the same mouthful, and Ikar covers Tofel. You'd only need one bracha as long as the Tofel item isn't mezonot. If the Tofel item is mezonot, you would require two brachot, a bracha on the Ikar and a bracha on the Tofel. Those are some of the rules that will help us better understand which bracha to make when you have a food mixture. And in class, we'll have a chance to explore this with some more application and some more hands-on learning. Looking forward to doing that with you when we return.